guys talking now?
Yeah.
Yeah, just when you were coming out of the
Okay.
church.
So we began to go out. Our people began to leaflet the folks in the pews, and as we walked out, everyone sitting in the pews just stood up, which is phenomenal. They stood up as a sign of respect.
Yeah.
And we walked out, and I'm telling you, the feeling, like most of the people in our group were survivors of this. They didn't have, for them to have done that was a miracle. I haven't seen a lot of miracles in life, but that's one of them, because these people, one of them, William Koons, who's, I'll talk to you about him in a bit, but William, at the Kamloops Catholic School, when he was a kid, they had a rack in the basement they used to stretch kids on as torture. They used to hang them by their arms like this.
Wow. It's horrible.
Horrible tortures, gang raped, just all of this terrible stuff. He saw children being buried. He said when he came up to the protest and he saw the cross and heard the bell, he started getting sick. He couldn't physically walk near that church, but then he said he saw us, and that encouraged him. He thought, I don't want to chicken out. I don't want to let them down. I've got to be there with these people, with my brothers and sisters. So that encouraged him, and then we encouraged him to go another step, and then finally William's the one handing out leaflets to everybody in the pews, and he came out that door, and it was beautiful. Like I've never seen him smile until that moment, and he was just so happy. He had done that because all the counseling in the world for years hadn't dealt with anything, but that 20 minutes with us in the church was like a lifetime of cure, because he said after that he stopped drinking.
Wow.
For the first time in 16 years. He wasn't drinking that week.
Wow.
Now, the next month he started drinking again. He was back in the old conditions, and he came back. But for that moment, there was like this opening that happened to him, because he found his strength in the company of all of us. And that's why I say that we do this together, right? By confronting the people who did this, right? And saying, you can't get away with this anymore, right? I'm not a helpless victim anymore. I'm a threat. Just like William said. He said, I'm a threat now, aren't I, Kev?
Yeah.
Right? And I said, yeah, you are a threat. So
Yeah.
keep going. So, that was a beautiful moment, and it was a lesson to all of us. It was funny because we totally dissed the police as well. Like, they came running up after me, and we said, you're not allowed in that church. And I said, well, sorry, Constable, but we've been in and out already. You should be quicker next time. We did that at other churches, and it's an amazing, empowering thing, because it shows people that they can take over those spaces, they can reclaim that space, they can put it right in the face of these people. And frankly, that's the kind of thing I think it's a brilliant tactic. It's what survivors need to do. Invade the churches, take them over. If we could do it in the Vatican, I'd do it there too, right? Because it's a spiritual battle we're engaged in, right? And that's, you got to confront the beast where he lives, and that's what I often say to people. So,
just tell me, you mentioned William Koons there.
Yeah.
Am I right in remembering he was the guy at Kamloops School? Was it who? Was there when the Queen was there and some children went missing? Can you elaborate on that story?
Well, if you look up in the records, do a Google search about the royal visits to Canada, you'll find that between October 5th and 13th, 1964, the Queen and Prince Philip did a state visit. And from what I've seen, they were supposed to have been in the eastern part of Canada, and there was a number of days that weren't accounted for. Well, according to William, he was a student at the Kamloops Catholic School, which is in the central part of British Columbia. And he said that what he remembers as the early time of the school year in 1964, and that would coincide, right? The Queen and Prince Philip showed up. And what struck him as odd later is that they didn't have a big retinue with them. They were just pretty much by themselves, and a few security, whoever it was. They took all of the children from the school down. He said it was called Dead Man's Creek, where they went, which is an interesting name. But they went down to Dead Man's Creek and had a picnic. And then the Queen and Prince Philip left within the company of 10 of the children. They took 7 boys and 3 girls with them, and those children were never seen again, which was odd because they were all from that area, and they all vanished. In the rest of their lives, they didn't see any of these people again.
Wow. Yeah.
So the question we have, and when we eventually get around to summoning the Queen as well, is does she have information about those children?
Yeah.
And as head of state and head of the Church of England, which helped set up these boarding schools, she also is one of the people legally liable for what went on in these residential schools.
Yeah.
We wrote a letter to her and to the Pope in 2008. It was delivered through the Governor General of Canada to the Queen, just like the Pope was issued one through the Papal Nuncio in Canada. This is the second letter we've sent to the Pope, right? But the first one was sent to the Pope and the Queen, and it asked them to identify the burial sites of these children who died in residential schools. Neither of them ever responded to the letter, which again I believe is an admission of guilt.
Yeah. Could we just go into a bit of the history of the Catholic Church in Canada? Can you tell us about the influence of the Jesuits in Canada, in the sort of residential schools and fur trading corporations?
Well, the Jesuits are key to a lot of this because they set up, their job when they were established as part of the Counter-Reformation in the 1500s was to establish kind of a bulwark ideologically against the Protestant Reformation and dissidents in the Catholic Church, right? So you find the Jesuits very involved in education. A lot of the universities in Europe were founded by Jesuits. They did the same thing in North America. Their missionaries tended to go in and they would find a few chiefs who they would convert, and then they would exile the non-Catholic Indians, kill them or drive them out of the communities, and establish Catholic Indian communities, right? That was used as the model for the Indian residential schools in the late 1800s. The Jesuits began setting up these schools, and the Protestants and the governments copied them and set up these schools. The Jesuits were a real power in Canada because early on there was, of course, a big rivalry between Britain and France for control of Canada and the French Indian Wars and all that. But prior to that, in the 1600s, the religious wars here in Europe were brought over to Canada and America. And so the English were allied with the Six Nations Confederacy, the Huron, the Mohawk, the Iroquois, and the others. The Huron were with the French. And behind the French were the Jesuits, who had established with the King of France these crown fur trading companies. And there's this quote from Madame de Pompadour, who was Louis XIV's mistress, and she said, "Canada exists to provide me with furs." That was her view, and it still is. Canada's always been that furs, timber, water, oil. It's always been a resource base for the British and the Americans and other various empires. But the Indians were key to the fur trade because they were the ones trapping all the animals. These fur trading companies went in and they realized that they needed to get a monopoly in this, so they had to attack the tribes that were allied with the English, who were also interested in the furs. The Jesuits went out into, and traditionally the Huron and the Iroquois were friends, but they fomented war between these nations. The Jesuits went out there, traded alcohol and firearms. They said that the Iroquois were heretics because they were with the English Protestants, who were all heretics and all damned. They fomented continual conflict between them, and they brought in smallpox. Probably 3/4 of the Huron and Iroquois in that were dead within a couple of generations of smallpox.
So the Jesuits brought in smallpox.
That's been documented. It's all Britain and France both use smallpox. There's in my book, Hidden No Longer: Genocide in Canada, Past and Present. It's my new book that's out now.
Do they spread it via blankets? Is that how they?
We documented that. There was a British general, Geoffrey Amherst, who in the 1740s wrote letters describing how they should take blankets laced, that had been on smallpox victims in their hospital, and send it out among the Mi'kmaq, the other Indians who were allied with the French. They documented that in his own journal. In British Columbia, I've just come across material showing that Anglican missionaries, there was a Church of England missionary called John Sheepshanks, who in the 1860s went out among the Chilcotin Indians of the central part of British Columbia, where they wanted to buy up land. The Hudson's Bay Company, the various land companies, and the Anglican Church bought up all this land even though there were Indians living on it. And then this John Sheepshanks went among them with smallpox inoculations, and within 4 weeks most of these Chilcotins were dead.
Wow.
And then they came in and they had all the land. And John Sheepshanks went back to England, became the Bishop of Norwich, and served in the House of Lords until 1908. So he got his reward for doing this germ warfare genocide on behalf of the Church of England and various, the Hudson's Bay Company, and really the economic power behind the genocide, right?
Yeah. Still sort of talking about history, the sort of more general history of the Catholic Church. Can you tell us about the papal bulls? Especially of 1455 and 93, but any others that you think are really relevant to the attitude of the Catholic Church to mankind? Basically.
Well, there's so many of them, frankly. All you have to do is a Google search and look up papal bull.